I was just a few months away from failing the promise I had made to my dying father when the storm hit. A blizzard, sudden and fierce, trapped the most notorious food critic in the country in my tiny town. And the only place open? My failing diner. The only dish I could offer? My dad's old, unassuming beef stew, the exact recipe that had been slowly running this place into the ground. I watched him take the first bite, my stomach twisting with dread, waiting for the review that would bury me. But instead, tears began streaming down his face. Before we dive in, tell me, what's the one comfort food that instantly takes you home? Comment below. And if stories about family, food, and the memories we carry in every bite speak to you, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what's coming next. The Blue Ridge Diner looked exactly the same as it had for the last 50 years. Red vinyl booths lined the room, the chrome-trimmed counter had stools that spun, a corner jukebox still played real records, and the menu hadn't changed since 1978. My father, Samuel Parker, opened this diner when he was 25 and ran it for 50 years until a heart attack took him 6 months ago. On his deathbed, he made me promise, Austin, never change a single thing. People need consistency. And I kept that promise, even as the diner slowly faded. The food wasn't the problem. It was fine, honest comfort food. The world had just stopped caring. Nearby, new trendy restaurants served artisanal versions of classic dishes. Bloggers raved about fusion cuisine. And here I was, serving the same beef stew my father had made since before I was born. My girlfriend, well, now ex-girlfriend, put it bluntly when she left 3 months earlier. Austin, you're not honoring your father's memory, you're living in it. This town's dying, this diner's dying, and you're going down with it because of a promise that doesn't make sense anymore. Maybe she was right. Our customers had dropped by 60% in 6 months. Young families went to the next city for dinner. Tourists flocked to the new cafe on Main Street with its picture-perfect lattes. My regulars were literally passing away. 4 funerals in 6 months, just for loyal patrons. I was crunching numbers for the 3rd time that week when the storm hit. It was sudden, like a scene out of a movie. By 6 o'clock, roads were impassable, the power flickered, and the few customers I had were safely home. I should have closed early. I should have gone upstairs to my apartment. But maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was habit, maybe it was pride. Whatever it was, I stayed open until 9 p.m. Then, at 8:47, the door burst open. Snow swirled in and a man stepped inside, tall in his mid-50s, coat dusted with white. He had sharp features, silver hair, and a presence that demanded attention. "Thank God," he said, with a faint New York accent. "I've been driving for 20 minutes looking for anything. Are you still serving food?" "Yes, sir," I said, trying to sound casual. "Have a seat anywhere. Coffee to warm up?" "Please." He chose a booth by the window, though outside was nothing but white chaos. As he removed his coat, something about him seemed familiar. I brought him coffee and a menu. His expression? Polite disappointment. He was clearly unimpressed by our old-school options. "What do you recommend?" he asked. Something in his tone put me on the defensive. "The beef stew is our specialty. Comes with homemade biscuits and a side salad." "I'll have that," he said, sliding the menu aside. No signal on his phone. The storm had knocked out the tower. He frowned, but didn't seem bothered. I retreated to the kitchen, relieved I had made a fresh batch that afternoon. My father's recipe was simple. Beef chuck, potatoes, carrots, onions, celery, tomato paste, stock, and a secret blend of herbs he'd never written down. I'd learned it by standing at his elbow over thousands of dinner services. He'd always said, "Good stew is like a good friendship. It takes time to develop its flavor." I ladled the stew into a bowl, plated 2 biscuits, and felt that familiar weight of inadequacy. Comfort food, honest food, but nothing extraordinary. I placed the meal in front of him, along with butter and a glass of water. He nodded and picked up his spoon. And then it hit me. I knew exactly who he was. Anthony Wright, the man whose reviews could make or break a restaurant in a single sentence. the critic who had terrified chefs across the country. And here I was, serving him my father's humble stew in a dying diner at the end of a snowstorm. My heart raced. Should I apologize? But how? Sorry, it's just a simple stew? That would only make it worse. I stayed behind the counter, pretending to clean, watching him out of my corner of an eye. He took a bite, inhaled, and froze. His spoon clattered. He stared at the bowl like it had spoken to him. Then tears, real, streaming tears down the cheeks of a man famous for his ruthless, emotionless critiques. I froze. Poisoned? Allergic? Was this a trick? I had no cell signal. The landline only reached the fire department. He dabbed his eyes, took another bite, and started shaking. I couldn't stay put any longer. "Sir, are you okay? Is something wrong with the food?" He looked up, voice thick with emotion. "Where did you get this recipe?" "It's my father's recipe. He made it the same way for 50 years. "Why? Every ingredient, every technique, I need to know." I sat across from him, confused. "It's just beef stew. Chuck roast, potatoes, carrots, onions, tomato paste, herbs." "The herbs. Which ones?" And then came the moment my father had always kept secret. I hesitated for a moment, then quietly said, "Thyme, bay leaves, and something else. My dad called it his secret ingredient. He never told me exactly what it was. I figured it out by smell. It's marjoram, just a tiny bit, added in the last 30 minutes. Anthony's head sank into his hands. Marjoram, of course. I should have remembered. I blinked. "I don't understand. Did I do something wrong?" He looked up, eyes red-rimmed but shining. "No, this is perfect. You know who I am?" I nodded, because there was no point pretending. "Then you should know that I've eaten at every restaurant worth mentioning in North America, and probably half of Europe. I've had dishes prepared by world-renowned chefs, meals that cost more than most people make in a week. But this simple beef stew in this diner is the most important meal I've had in 20 years, because it tastes exactly like my mother's recipe, the one I thought I'd lost forever." My chest tightened. I wasn't just seeing a critic moved to tears. I was watching someone reconnect with a memory that had been buried for decades. Anthony pulled a wallet from his pocket and handed me a worn photograph. It showed a young woman in a kitchen I instantly recognized, the Blue Ridge Diner, only newer. She was laughing, wearing an apron, holding a wooden spoon, and beside her, a young man with his arm around her shoulders. My father. "Catherine and Sam, 1979. Best kitchen partner I ever had. I promised to never change your stew. Farewell, Cat. S.P." the faded handwriting read. They worked together. She must have taught him her recipes, made him promise to preserve them. I thought of my father's dying words about the menu, not about tradition, not about stubbornness, but about keeping a promise. Anthony's mother had entrusted a piece of her legacy to my father, and he had safeguarded it through the decades. "Mr. Wright," I said, my voice thick, "my father made me promise the same thing. I've been keeping that promise, even though it's killing the business." Anthony smiled faintly, understanding shining through his grief. "Then let's make sure it survives." He followed me into the diner's kitchen. Everything was old, worn, but meticulously cared for. The 6-burner stove my father bought in 1982, the wooden cutting board smooth from decades of use, the ancient refrigerator that still ran perfectly. Anthony walked slowly, reverently, as if he were touring a cathedral. Hands gliding over the counters, examining pots, the spice rack, soaking in every detail. "This is exactly the kind of kitchen she loved," he said softly. Simple, honest, built for good work, not for show. She used to say fancy equipment is just a way to hide poor skill. I asked cautiously, "Anthony, if you loved your mother's cooking so much, why become a critic? Why spend 20 years judging others?" He paused. "I was looking for her. In every restaurant, every dish, every meal I reviewed, I was searching for that feeling of home, that sense of being loved. And when I couldn't find it, I got bitter, angry. I lashed out at chefs who were only trying to bring joy, the way my mother did. I finally understood. His critiques weren't cruelty. They were grief, a longing for something irretrievably lost. Perhaps, he said quietly, that's no excuse for the damage I caused." We walked silently for a moment, two men connected by food, memory, and promise. "Anthony, may I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "What are you going to do with this place? Your father's been gone 6 months. You must have thought about your future." I swallowed. I didn't know. 3 months, maybe 4, before the bills forced me to close permanently. "You're serving your father's food to the world," Anthony said thoughtfully. "But what if the world hasn't moved on? What if it just forgot what really matters? This food, these recipes, they're not outdated, they're authentic. In a world of foam, tweezers, and ingredients no one can pronounce, you're offering something rare, honest comfort, made with skill, preserved with love. That's priceless." But the diner was still empty. I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Then why is no one coming here?" "Because no one knows," Anthony said simply. "Secrets don't keep restaurants open. You need to tell your story, and I think I know how to do that." A blizzard night that changed everything. The storm raged outside. Anthony used the diner's landline to call his assistant in New York, explaining the delay. But he didn't stop eating. He shared stories about his mother, Catherine Wright, about her cooking, her joy, the way she believed feeding people was a form of love. I shared my father's story, his stubborn integrity, his pride in doing things right, working 7 days a week for 50 years, dying in the kitchen he loved. "Your father and my mother," Anthony said softly, "both believed in the power of simple, honest food. You've kept her recipes alive. I just didn't know it." 3 days later, after the storm cleared and Anthony returned to New York, he emailed me a story. Not a review, not a critique, but a personal essay. "The Stew That Stopped Time," a love letter to his mother, to my father, to the diner, to the magic of food, connecting generations. The essay arrived in my inbox, and I opened it with cautious curiosity. As I read Anthony's words, my hands shook. He wrote about the blizzard, about finding the diner, and the first bite of stew that transported him back decades to his mother's kitchen. He spoke of memory, love, and the invisible thread connecting his mother's legacy to my father's devotion. He wrote about how a simple recipe, beef chuck, vegetables, stock, tomato paste, herbs, and that mysterious marjoram could hold more history, emotion, and connection than any modern culinary masterpiece ever could. He wasn't judging the food, he was honoring it. Not just the ingredients, but the people who had made it, preserved it, and shared it with the world. My phone rang before I could even finish reading the essay. "Austin," he said, voice steady but warm, "I can't let this go unnoticed. This story, it's too personal, but it's exactly what the world needs to see." I hesitated. What if people come and the food isn't good enough? Anthony's voice grew firm. "It is perfect.
45 years of care, love, and dedication don't just disappear. Trust your father, trust Catherine, trust yourself. And so, we took a leap of faith. 3 days after the essay was published in Culinary Quarterly, the world responded. Within hours, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. People called from neighboring towns, from across New England, from even farther away, asking where the Blue Ridge Diner was, what time we opened, and if they could taste the stew that had moved Anthony Wright to tears. By the end of the first week, reservations were booked out for 3 months. I had to hire back the 2 servers I'd let go and bring in a part-time cook to keep up with demand. The diner that had been on the brink of closure was now alive with laughter, chatter, and the scent of beef stew simmering in the kitchen. People didn't just come for the food. They came for the story, for the connection, for a sense of authenticity that the modern world had almost forgotten. They came for the love baked into every dish, every biscuit, every carefully measured secret of marjoram. Understanding the promise. It was then that I finally understood what my father's promise had been about. It wasn't about clinging to the past or resisting change. It was about protecting something priceless, a piece of human connection, a fragment of history, and a memory that could touch the heart of anyone willing to taste it. Anthony returned 6 months later, not stranded this time, but intentionally, driving up on a crisp September afternoon. The diner was thriving, every booth full, the counter buzzing with patrons. He paused at the corner where we'd placed a framed photograph. Catherine Wright and my father, young and smiling, spoon in hand, laughter frozen in time. Anthony stood silently before it, eyes glistening. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for keeping her alive, for honoring what your father and my mother built together." I smiled. "Thank you for showing me why it mattered, for helping me understand that keeping a promise isn't living in the past, it's carrying forward what matters." That night after closing, we shared a quiet dinner, beef stew, biscuits, and conversation that lasted until midnight. We spoke of parents, legacies, and the unexpected ways love survives. "I've decided something," Anthony said, as he prepared to leave. "I'm retiring from restaurant criticism. That essay? That's my last one. I want to do something different." "What will you do?" I asked. "I'm writing a cookbook about my mother, her recipes, and the way food connects us to the people we love. I was hoping you might help me. Your father preserved her recipes. Together, we can share them with the world." 6 months later, Catherine's Kitchen, Recipes for Connection, was published. It became a bestseller, but more importantly, it reminded people that the best food doesn't need to be complicated or trendy. It only needs care, love, and connection. The Blue Ridge Diner thrived, its heart preserved. Every bowl of beef stew, every biscuit, every secret whisper of marjoram reminded me of the promises made decades ago and the love that could survive generations. The lessons learned. Some promises are worth keeping even when they seem to hold you back, because they're not about the past. They're about the people who shaped you, the connections that endure, and the love that can be preserved in something as simple as a bowl of stew. My father's beef stew saved the diner, yes, but more importantly, it connected me to people I'd never met, healed old wounds, and proved that the most important ingredient in any recipe isn't something you can measure. It's love, memory, and care. Anthony found his mother in that stew, and I found my purpose, my history, and my connection to the legacy entrusted to me. And sometimes, just sometimes, a bowl of humble stew can change everything.